So what happens if you actually try? What if you actually tried to get your mind right? What if you actually tried to live the high life? What if you happen to die cause life is finite? What if you actually tried to live your best day ever? What if you actually tried to get your mind right? What if you actually tried to live the high life? What if you happen to die cause life is finite? What if you actually tried to live your best day ever? What if you actually grind out when the time's right? What if you actually blinded by your hindsight? What if you actually find out what defines life? What if you actually tried to live your best day ever? I'm getting 1% better every day. I'm getting 1% better every way. I'm waking up every day to a sunny day. No matter what the weather say, life is like a record, so just let it play.
Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Best Day Media Ever. As always, I'm your host, Matt McKeever, joined by my co-host, Adam Martin. Hey, Adam, how are you doing?
Hey, everybody. Doing well this morning.
Awesome. Well, we've got a handful of different stories I'm excited to explore with you guys. Obviously, we saw the U.S. midterm elections last night. We're still waiting for certain confirmations in regards to how that all shakes out. But I think right now the TLDR seems to be that it's likely going to be a red house and either a split Senate or give or take one seat. So we'll kind of see how that all plays out with time.
It's like really close. Like closer than I would have imagined. I was just checking it and I just shared it on my socials just before this. Like hot dog, it is a race. I mean, this is by no stretch of the imagination a red tsunami, as they were saying.
It's always interesting how quick those things seem to evolve. I'm not sure if I fully understand why and how these things play out, right? Like if you were looking at the polls a month ago or maybe 6 weeks ago now, it seemed like it was going to be very blue according to pollsters. Then it seemed like the narrative swiftly changed, and now it just seems to be it is what it is. And I think that's probably just a reoccurring theme in general. Obviously, we saw a few interesting controversies. We're not going to get deep into any of those today. We'll wait until more information comes out around the U.S. election, but we've got lots of other stories to jump in with you guys, so I'm excited to get started. Let's start off where we've started off for the last few days. This one's from True North. Day 19 recap of the Emergencies Act hearings. Trudeau told Ford no additional legal tools required to clear protest. So again, there's nothing like here that's like the smoking gun as we've talked about in previous episodes, but I still think it's important that we just stay informed at least on some of the highlights here. So I want to highlight a couple points. Trudeau also took a shot at the intellect of protesters on the call to Ford. I always wonder if they are not very smart people, Trudeau said to Ford, to think about shaming Canada in all sorts of ways and hurting the economy and getting jobs back to the U.S. I'll just say it feels like he's projecting here, but I'll maybe leave it at that for now rather than go down another Trump triad or triad, whatever that word is on my end. Next point I wanted to make here was Ford repeatedly had to remind the Prime Minister on the call that it was illegal for him to direct the OPP to do anything. So again, I don't know, like it seems like Trudeau and Ford were overall in alignment with a lot of things. Just they were trying to figure out exactly how to go about implementing what they wanted implemented in regards to shutting down the protest. I don't know. I think today we're seeing, is it Jim Williamson or Watson or something like that? The mayor of Coutts, Alberta, is giving his testimony. I saw an interesting little clip that I think was out of context, so I'll save speculating on that for now. But if that clip ends up being true and there's no additional context, it seems weird. It was in regards to the guns that were found in Coutts, Alberta. But again, it might have been doctored or taken out of context. I'm not sure. So we'll keep rolling here. On to the next story from Global News. City of Toronto drops COVID vaccine mandate. Staff to be offered reinstatement. So a memo written by interim city manager Tracy Cook and sent to managers says as of December 1st, the city's COVID-19 vaccination policy will be updated to reflect the mandatory vaccination is no longer required for city staff, volunteers, and contractors. I guess the first thing that stands out to me about this is like, why do we need to wait until December 1st? right? Like if you've decided like is something drastic or important happening between now and December 1st?
Yeah, these arbitrary timelines, like that was always the case too when they were reducing or removing restrictions to travel and things like that. You're like, okay, well, if we've decided this is unimportant, then what's so important about this future date that's not immediate?
Mm-hmm. And another little highlight I wanted to share here, guys, a reminder link to this article as well as all the articles that we're going to discuss today is in the Telegram chat. With more than 90% of the public and 99% of the city staff now at least 2 doses of vaccine, the science and public health guidance no longer supports the need for a mandatory vaccine policy. I don't know whether I should even quibble here over details, but like, first of all, those first 2 doses, assuming that you got them a while ago, are doing jack shit for you.
Literally
So
nothing.
it's weird and bizarre that like I hope best case scenario, if I'm going to be white pilled here, this is them this is as close to them admitting defeat as we're going to get, and hopefully this all just goes away. However, a couple other update stories I've got for you guys makes me think that we haven't seen the last of the COVID hysteria narrative here in Canada. But we'll get to that in a second. So again, if you guys are interested, jump into that Global News Network article in our Telegram chat. Next from CBC, Facebook parent company Meta lays off 11,000 people, about 13% of the workforce at company impacted. And so a couple of things here quick. Now, obviously, this isn't the 50% that Elon Musk laid off, but still a pretty good chunk of people. And obviously, Elon Musk, I'm referring to Twitter there. I guess the reason I wanted to highlight this is I think we're seeing a lot of white collar, above average income jobs disappearing. And I think that this, again, is just one more signal that we're likely going into recession. And companies like Meta, Facebook, like Twitter, like some of the other companies we've covered previously, I think they're preparing themselves, right? I also saw some interesting headlines around FedEx and them grounding planes because it seems like a lot of shipping isn't at the volumes that we would expect if we were in a healthy economy. Then jumping over just quickly to update in general in regards to the U.S. election. This is from Zero Hedge. Now, this came out a few hours ago, so again, there may be information that's slightly changed or updated since then. Republicans see gains in midterms, but red wave hopes fade as Democrats outperform. And as I mentioned, it looks like it'll likely be a red house, and the Senate, I think, honestly looks like a coin toss. I guess if I was just kind of speaking about my thoughts, it's interesting to see that it looks like Nevada might flip red. And that would probably, all other things being equal, put the Republicans in a more favorable position with the Senate. But again, whether they'll actually get those 51 votes to have control. And my understanding of the way U.S. politics works, right, is if it's a dead split, 50-50 both sides, then essentially you'll see Kamala Harris having the tiebreaker as vice president. So anyways, Ron DeSantis won. It looked like he gained significant momentum there. So already the speculation begins about, his future potential presidency campaign and things of that nature. We'll see how that all plays out. Although I am happy that Stacey Abrams isn't going to be a governor. That's a net positive, in my opinion.
Have you seen some of the memes coming out about that? I mean, the internet is just lit right up about her right now.
No, I haven't, but I'm sure there's some good ones.
There's some excellent commentary from, I would say, from the right.
Yeah. And I mean, I guess the last thing we'll maybe say on US elections before continuing on is like Fetterman. Like, for the love of
Yeah.
goodness, America, if that shouldn't be a wake up call that a man that literally has mental capacity issues because of a stroke he experienced, if you're still willing to vote him in, I feel like we're not that far off from voting in like a dog or a mascot or an inanimate object for all I know.
And this is not to say anything about his character. He could be a great guy, but he's simply not the best candidate. Like that's just it's factual, right? Like I don't think anybody can argue that. He's just not the best candidate. And in a state of millions of people, what are we talking about here? Like it's so outrageous.
And speaking out of outrageous, let's switch over to CTV News here. Majority of Canadians support return of face masks in indoor public spaces if deemed necessary survey. Now, there's a few different angles I guess I could approach this story with. I guess first things first, already I think the framing of this is interesting, right? If deemed necessary. Well, like, what's the exact context there? What sort of subtleties are the individuals being pulled, reading into? This was also another hybrid survey, as we've discussed previously. So, again, this is where they try and call people up to 5 times. If you don't answer, then they just move on and select another person. This one, I don't believe, showed what response of people actually like responded out of those phone calls. Where at least the last one that we were discussing from CBC, it laid out at least what was actually going on in that regards. Because I think that that's important too, right? Like if only 10% of people initially respond when they call, it's hard for me to not believe that that sample is going to be biased. And I get it; these guys are better math than I am, but I still just won't believe it. I don't know. Maybe I'm just anti-science in this one little aspect here, but yeah, I don't like the way that I feel like this narrative is being framed. I don't think that the COVID hysteria is going away in Canada anytime soon. And I think it's only when they believe that these policies will absolutely be refused by the general public that we'll actually see them move on from this narrative. And yeah, it's wild because the dichotomy between Canada and the US continues to grow. I honestly get embarrassed when I see British politicians like making fun of Canadians and our hysteria around COVID. And they're like, listen, we're not Australia or Canada. We need to get back to normal in Britain. I'm just like, for the love of God, like these people celebrate like inbred royalty. And yet here we are like being made fun of by Britain. So, anyways, just wanted to highlight that because, again, this narrative not going anywhere in the near future if the powers that be have anything to say about it. Now, let's jump over to a couple WTF stories. This first one is from Louder with Crowder. White House lashes out at voters with one last angry tweet before America goes to vote. And I'll have to double check here, but either Twitter was freaking out on me or this tweet actually got deleted after the fact. Let's just double check this, but I'm pretty sure this tweet got deleted by the. Oh no, okay, it must weird. I don't know why that wasn't loading for me the first time, but the the framing of this I honestly find disgusting. From
Wow.
President Biden, you don't get to accept hundreds of thousands of dollars in pandemic loans and then attack my administration for helping working folks get some relief. Like, no, absolutely, like that's complete bullshit and uh just inaccurate on so many levels, right? Like one, your government and Trump's government as well caused the pandemic paranoia, right? Caused all the economic hardships that forced a lot of businesses into having to try and somehow salvage or triage their existence by accepting loans and bailouts from the government. And then secondly, if I understand correctly, if this is in reference to paying off the student debts in debt forgiveness, that wasn't legally passed whatsoever. That's literally you guys just being like, catch me if you can. And we're going to do this until the Supreme Court stops us. I just, again, the hubris I see from these people, like they're supposed to work for us. It's not supposed to be the other way around. And these sort of dictates in politicking, I am so done with it. But before we get into the next story, which I really think is a doozy, I need to reshare my screen so I can share with you guys the audio because you're not going to want to miss what Bill Clinton says here. I was showing Adam
my
this last
God.
night. So Clinton ambushed over friendship with Jeffrey Epstein. And I talk about gross sound clips. This one is a doozy.
Oh, Matt, you're not sharing yet.
Oh. Okay. My
I think
bad
you
there,
just
guys.
hadn't. I think you hadn't toggled it on yet, but yeah, guys, this is a especially devious clip.
All right, let's start this over.
Any comments on the alleged allegation of your connection with Jeffrey Epstein?
So, if you guys didn't actually able to hear that, because I know the audio is not great sometimes when it's shared, he said, I think the evidence is clear on that. Again, I just like the smirk, the hubris of it. Like the evidence that's available to us is that it appears that you were one of the most regular guests on the Lolita Express, which again is a reference to a book that involves an adult male essentially abusing a teenager girl. Like, I would at least like to think that the elites prep for this sort of shit. Like that one of their handlers would be like, What do you say if someone asks you about Epstein?" And that they would practice this instead of like getting answers like Bill Clinton just provided. And like we previously saw with another Bill Gates, in regards to him being like, "Well, he's dead, so there's that." And it's like, so the evidence is clear for itself, and so he's dead, there's that. Those are the two things that you guys have to say about this child raping ring. It's just wild.
Matt, like
the hubris.
I literally can't imagine if somebody had essentially just accused you of those acts. Like, do you not think that it would literally be a requirement to, at the very least, say I had nothing to do with that? Like, if that was the truth, like, don't you just
Yeah, like
wouldn't you
if
just
I
have
was
a
innocent,
visceral
that would be
reaction?
the first shit coming out of my mouth is like, "Listen, I hear a lot of these rumors. Let's sit down for like 8 hours and have a
Yeah,
full length. Like, I'll go on Joe Rogan, Lex Friedman, whatever. But I'm going to get out the full story here." But
like, uh, but to just say like I think the evidence is clear. You're like, no, he was convicted for like
yeah, and you were
child
on his plane
rape
26
and
times.
like child molestation and rape and like imprisonment and like dude, like he was convicted of like literally probably the worst thing you can do in society, and you just say I think the evidence is clear. What?
Like, my
Like
biggest
that?
question is like, what evidence are you referring to? The
Well,
fact that
that's
we
what I
haven't
mean.
put you in jail yet?
Like he killed himself. That's the evidence? No. Dude, I don't think we'll actually get a better WTF moment for this show. Like that is actually so fucking wild
Well,
that
I'll try and up the ante right now, Adam, because I forgot about
no,
this bonus one.
no.
And this is Justin Trudeau to appear
Oh
on
yeah.
Canada's Drag Race spin-off series. So Canadian Prime Minister making history by swinging by the workroom, which I guess is what they call it, on Canada's Drag Race, Canada versus the world. So there's just so much about this. One, this feels so on brand for Justin Trudeau. I'm not going to be surprised if he ends up in blackface and in drag during this episode of RuPaul's drag show. But, you know, wasn't it just earlier this year we had to enact the Emergencies Act against our own citizens because reasons? Like, how does he have time in his schedule to go on this TV appearance, right? And why this TV appearance of all things? And one of the first things I saw was, I think, from Rachel Gilmore coming out about, like, I think something to the effect of, like, how brave and bold it is for Justin Trudeau to go on this show. And it's like, no, it's not at all. Like, again, there's so many other, like, let's get clean drinking water at every First Nations reserve first, right? Like, let's do all that stuff before we go on a drag race.
Dude, the Emergency Act order tells the country and its citizens from the government's mouth directly that we are facing essentially an existential crisis where literally we need to have so many rules and be able to override the Charter of Rights and Freedoms because we are facing an existential crisis. And then this guy is parading around on a goddamn drag race show. Like I literally don't get it. And like there's also right now not going to be a riot in Ottawa about this. Like this is just going to fly by. It's not even going to matter. And you're just like, dude, I don't get like which one of these is true. Either we're okay to be on drag race shows or the country's in existential crisis. Like those are the only two options. Like I just don't really get it. At the same time, another WTF I saw this morning is Sean Penn handing off to Zelensky his Oscar to hold. I'm like, okay, fuckers, either we're all at war or there's nothing to see here. And like, you can't have both. It's just so crazy to me.
Yeah, the Sean Penn stuff is just bizarre to say the least. He's like, when you win the war, come back and bring this to me in
To
Malibu.
Malibu.
And you're
What
like,
the
what?
fuck does that mean?
Yeah, does not compute for me at least. But let's jump over to the first main story of the day. Now, for those of you that don't live a crypto-centric life, I can understand why this probably seems like no big deal, but I think there is more to this story than a lot of people realize, and we'll try and untangle at least a certain amount of the thread here. But I encourage anyone that really wants to understand this, you're going to have to read the links that I shared in the Telegram chat and sink your teeth into it, because there's no way we can summarize it in just a couple minutes here. But FTX post-mortem, Bankman-Fried admitted the Ponzi business of crypto yield farming months ago. So I guess maybe before we even get into this Zero Hedge article, I'm going to highlight from Bitcoin Magazine, the exchange war, Binance smells blood as FTX and Alameda rumors mount. So essentially over the last, let's call it 3 days, we saw billions of dollars just disappear or evaporate when it comes to market valuations on certain cryptocurrency assets. And particularly, we're talking about FTT here, which was a currency from the FTX exchange. And this also ties in Alameda Research, which is, I don't know if they're directly associated, but a previously associated entity. And what I think the most harsh critics of all this will say is this is just another example of the Ponzi economics that regularly goes on in the crypto universe when it comes to all of this. So what we saw was also a bit of a Twitter beef breakout between Binance, which is one of the largest players in the crypto trading marketplace world, and FTX, which was again one of the biggest players. And temporarily, it seemed like at one point in time, Binance was trying to force FTX to capitulate by selling all of their tokens. So they had originally been an equity investor. I think about a year ago, they took out their $2 billion equity investment. That was made up of USD stable coins, as well as about 580 million, if memory serves me, of the FTT token. And recently, they started dumping that hard. And it turned out that Alameda Research, the vast majority of their assets, well, not the vast majority, but about 6 or 7 billion of their $14 billion in assets were directly tied to this FTT token. And anyways, once you kind of like get deep enough into this, you realize that the actual float out there of people trading in FTT and regularly using it was a drop in the bucket compared to the amount that a couple of insider organizations held on their balance sheet. And so, I think those that wanted to position this unfavorably would say, this was them trying to inflate the asset by restricting or controlling the supply and artificially making the price go up. And for whatever reason, Binance decided they were done with it. Maybe they got spooked. Maybe they just finally put two and two together and understood this. Now, we did see yesterday Binance come out and for at least a period of time seemed like they were going to acquire FTX and bail them out. Now, recently, we're hearing rumors that that's not going to be the case, that the balance sheet of these entities were even worse off than what Binance originally expected when they said that they were going to enter into this non-binding letter of intention, or LOI. So the TLDR here is all of the crypto markets are down because when liquidity drains from one asset, it often causes a panic, and individuals that were maybe leveraged have to make themselves whole, and so they often then have to sell other crypto positions. This creates like a waterfall or cascading effect throughout the economy. But what Zero Hedge here was kind of zoning in on was the CEO of FTX, the company that's kind of crumbling right now in real time. And we're literally going from, I think a week ago, this token was worth $25 to, I don't know where it is now, but it's maybe like $4 or $4 and change. So again, 75% sell off in valuation. But over the summer, I was stunned when a friend of mine sent me an interview with FTX CEO and crypto billionaire Sam Bankman-Fried. Again, a few weeks ago, his net worth was valued at $16 billion. It's now valued at under $1 billion that I had never seen before. In the interview, Sam, who I recently noted, knows more about the inner bowels of the DeFi crypto space than anybody basically, came out and admitted that crypto lending was one giant Ponzi scheme. So, of course, many of us knew that the space was a Ponzi scheme already, as I've been adamantly outspoken about. But it was the sheer, unadulterated, matter-of-fact style, bald-faced admission by Bankman-Fried that caused my jaw to drop when I read and listened to it this week. Now, looking back on the FTX collapse this week, it's even more stunning that nobody saw it coming. And now, to be fair, there's a lot of individuals that did call this out in advance. A lot of individuals comparing this to Celsius and Luna and other sort of exchanges that we've seen collapse previously. But Matt asked the same daring question that Peter Schiff asked of Celsius CEO Alex Mashinsky back in November 2021. Where does the extra cash for yield farming actually come from? While Mashinsky ducked the answer, at least Bankman-Fried tried to describe it, though he did so as a black box where new investor money pays out old investor money, also known as a Ponzi scheme. Can you give me an intuitive understanding of farming? I mean, like, to me, farming is like you sell some structured puts and collect premium, but perhaps there's a more sophisticated understanding than that. Levine asked Bankman Fried, and then Bankman Fried responded, you start with a company that builds a box, and in practice, this box, they probably dress it up to look like a life-changing, world-altering protocol that's going to replace all big banks in 38 days or whatever. Maybe for now, actually ignore that it does or pretends it does literally nothing. It's just a box. So what this protocol is, it's called Protocol X. It's a box, and you take a token. You can take Ethereum, you can put it in the box, and you take it out of the box. All right, so you put it into the box, and you get an IOU for having put it in the box, and then you can redeem that IOU back out of the token. So if that all sounds like kind of weird, it's because it is. And again, I've never really understood yield farming. I have known people that have invested in yield farming. I know people that still do it to this day. I know people have made a lot of money. I know people have lost a lot of money. In general, I know more people that have lost money than made money when it comes to yield farming, but that is just my anecdotal experience. But I just thought, these interviews came out a while ago. I remember originally listening to them and being like, yeah, there's more truth than not in this. Again, that there's a slight oversimplification when we start talking about these like boxes, right? And what they're really worth. Often there is a lot of marketing and spin around them. And so it's very difficult to get really to the bottom of what's fact or fiction. And if you guys, again, want to really understand, you need to check out the Substack article. It's very thorough, goes in depth, breaks down the different players involved with kind of this scandal or cryptocurrency collapse, and also explores some other implications of it. So, again, highly recommend you guys check out the Substack and subscribe to it if you're so inclined. But to bring this all back into Canada and Canada politics, Ontario Teachers Pension Plan faces a hit on investment in crypto trading platform FTX. So again, the OTPP, right? I think that's the acronym for it. They actually got involved and were investing in this. Now, exactly how much they invested, we don't really know. What we do know is they participated in a round of financing that I think consisted of about $400 million. So obviously their exposure will be less than $400 million. But this also highlights this isn't the first time we've saw a Canadian or provincial pension plan take a massive hit when it comes to kind of these speculative investments that they're making in the crypto markets. So the situation marks the second such stumble for a major Canadian pension plan in the world of crypto. In August, the Caisse de dépôt, a placement de Quebec, completely wrote off its US $150 million investment in crypto platform Celsius Networks, which filed for bankruptcy protection in July. So I suspect that there's a good chance that the Ontario Teachers Pension Plan is likely going to have to write off their entire investment here as well, particularly if we see CZ, the CEO of Binance, not go through with his non-binding LOI in regards to FTX.com and their assets. So there could be a lot of pain there. And I guess just one little quip here. Given the fluid nature of the situation, we have no comment right now. Teacher spokesman Dan Mage said Tuesday he declined to say how large the investment was, but noted the FTX was not included in the pension plan's list of investments of more than $200 million. So presumably it's less than $200 million in total exposure that the pension plan has. Now, if you guys go back and look at this, there's some really interesting quotes that have came out from the pension plan about this, saying that investing in the exchange is essentially, as risk-free as an investment gets, which is a pretty damning statement overall, particularly now given the superpower of hindsight.
Yeah, I mean, this will have real life consequences, right, for people that are relying on these pension plans and things like that. And it's interesting to just hear them say, like, this is the safest possible thing. It's like, well, that remains to be seen, I think.
Well, and that was before this all came out, obviously, right? So they currently have no comment now in regards to it. But as far as how big of a hit is it? If I'm not mistaken, I think the OTTP, yeah, it has about $222 billion. So if it's a $200 million or less investment, this won't be earth shattering, right? This is certainly going to be less than 1% of their portfolio. But still raises the question of, why were they chasing these sort of yields? Was it necessary to chase these sort of yields and take on this sort of risk?
Yeah. I mean, it seems fairly risky to me. Like we have a saying in crypto, right? Not your keys, not your crypto. So like I'm not sure why a direct investment in something like Bitcoin wouldn't be technically less risk.
Yeah, I think their argument is that they were investing in equities here and not in crypto, but those equities, the equity evaluation was so tethered to crypto that I definitely understand what you're saying. But anyways, let's jump over to the second story of the day. This one from Fee Stories, definitely not breaking news, but I thought it was just a fun historical context for us to explore because outside of the US midterm elections and honestly, the cryptocurrency market imploding into massive layoffs from major employers in North America, I actually haven't seen a lot of news stories that really piqued my interest. So I want to go down this rabbit hole with you guys. So Otto von Bismarck, the man behind the modern welfare state. The late political humorist Tom Anderson once said that the welfare state was so named because the politicians get well and the rest of us pay the fare. Economist Walter Williams claimed it was like feeding the sparrows through the horses. Someone else defined it as a lot of people standing in a circle and each one has his hands in the next guy's pocket. Personally, I think it's a scenario in which politicians offer security, but ultimately deliver bankruptcy, financial, and moral. Perhaps the most eloquent critiques of the welfare state come from economist Thomas Sowell. In various places, he has described it thusly. The welfare state is the oldest con game in the world. First, you take people's money away quietly, and then you give some of it back to them flamboyantly. It has always been judged by its good intentions rather than its bad results. It shields people from the consequences of their own mistakes, allowing irresponsibility to continue and to flourish among ever wider circles of people. It's not really about the welfare of the masses, it's about the egos of the elites. That certainly rings true, and I think that that's the most condemning critique, and still, while still, focusing on brevity here. It really is about, quietly stealing money from the public or taxing them, and then giving a little bit of it back and making yourself sound like a hero. And that's literally what every single politician in our modern democracies do these days. One man is known as the father of the modern versions. And this is regarding to like the social welfare state. That would be Otto von Bismarck, Chancellor of Germany for nearly 20 years. So what's interesting here is I think a lot of people don't understand where some of our institutions and government programs come from, right? You've maybe heard of the Frankfurt School, but you've probably never really dug deep into it and why our modern schooling system is the way it is. But again, once you start to read up on the Frankfurt School, you realize like, oh, schools weren't really for the benefit of the people. Like we were making schools for the benefit of factory owners, right? And the benefit of GDP and things of that nature. So just wanted to share that with you guys first, but let's get into why this ended up all coming together in the first place. So, the Iron Chancellor, as he was known in his day, united 25 separate principalities. So, again, a lot of people don't realize Germany for the longest time didn't really exist in the modern sense that we think of it as. So, it became the German Empire or federated in 1871 with Wilhelm I as the emperor's sovereign. Bismarck moved in subsequent years to consolidate his own power over German politics and society. And again, this is fascinating if you guys want to go down rabbit hole of history research. Like Bismarck, a lot of people argue that he's the one that kept Europe out of war until World War One, and it was only like after his decline and death that you saw Wilhelm kind of step in and muck up all the geopoliticking that Bismarck had done. No, I'm not saying he was a good person, but just wanted to give some interesting context there. So within a decade, he saw the socialists as a major and growing threat. He decided the best way to stymie them was to bribe the electorate before the socialists possessed enough seats in parliament to do the very same thing and worse. So essentially, his argument was we need to kind of get in front of socialists by giving them a little bit of bread and circuses so that the plebs don't start demanding too much. Or again, maybe they break in a different direction and want, ultimate freedom, which again would be a bad thing from Bismarck's perspective. The modern German welfare state began not as a utopian vision of altruism and compassion, but as nothing more than a political ploy for one man to keep himself and his allies in office. It was relatively a modest start for a welfare state, but to use another animal analogy, the camel's nose was now under the tent. Bismarck's initiatives imparted a confidence to 20th century welfare status that they could do so much more and wreak so much more havoc in the process. So again, I kind of thought this was a fun story to explore and riff upon the history and context of how the modern socialist state came to be. And as Thomas Sowell pointed out, and we quoted here above, it's always judged based upon its intentions rather than its results. And I think that's the thing that's most frustrating to me about any statist policy is the fact that they hide behind their good intentions rather than the actual results, right? And I know to tie this into maybe modern Canadian politics, there's a video right now going viral, right, with over 2 million views. I think it's something, the title is something of like the death of Vancouver. And it's just showing like the decay, the homelessness, the drug issues that are all playing out right now in the city of Vancouver in British Columbia. And again, most people are just like, well, we need more like needle exchanges. We need more support. We need more this. We need more this, that, or the other. And they've got good intentions behind their policies, but they're not actually trying to fix any of the underlying like issues, right, or causes of what's going on here. And I think that's important to understand that the socialist state started off not with good intentions, and even today, when they pretend to have good intentions, we should really be focused on the results. Any thoughts here, Adam?
Yeah, no, I generally just agree with the results thing. And you just reminded me of something I read a couple days ago. Trudeau just announced a $500 million investment into bringing internet to some more northern regions of Canada. And then so I was like, oh, okay, internet in northern Canada. That sounds kind of cool. And then they released kind of the stats, the initial stats on what they think that's going to do for us. And it was basically like 60,000 houses are now going to get internet. And you're like, whoa, hold on, $500 million to get internet to 60,000 houses. And I'm just like, God damn it. Like those results are so brutal. Like, how are we doing this? We're like blasting Canadian Shield and running hardwires through here.
That's wild, actually.
Rather than like just getting internet from the sky, like the rest of the goddamn world's doing, right? Like this is what I'm trying to like get my head wrapped around, how you spend $500 million and it only affects 60,000 people. And you're like, okay, this is quietly robbing and then flamboyantly giving it back, right? Where you're like, yeah, but you need high-speed internet. You're like, yeah, but there's like Starlink. Like, what are we talking about right now?
Yeah, and for context there, that works out to $83,000 per household.
Yes, exactly. So
and Starlink is like, I don't know, it was maybe $600 to buy the equipment, and then it's like under $200 a month. You essentially could set these people up with like 4 years of free internet, and I suspect they're still going to have to pay for this internet that they're installing.
Exactly. So if you just peel back even one layer, you're like, yeah, okay, but they're still going to have to pay probably large fees to get that high-speed internet service now, right? So it's like, what the fuck are we talking about, man? Like, this is an absolutely clear case of quietly stealing money from you in the form of taxation, and property taxes are going to be crazy up there, and all these things. And then, but I'm giving you internet, right? So I'm going to flamboyantly give you Netflix, right? You need to watch Netflix. And so now you've got the ability to do that. And you're like, yeah, but did anybody ask for this? Rather than just looking through some of the alternatives to having better results with less inputs. But yeah, that's clearly
and I think we all know when it comes to government estimates and budgets, they almost always end up over when they actually implement. So
guaranteed.
Again, it's so absurd how there's no real consequences to their policy mistakes and their overspending.
Yeah. Well, that and they'll also botch the implementation. So it'll take way longer than they're saying. It'll cost more money and probably affect less people. And you're like, okay, great.
And probably be slower.
Yeah. And literally not as good as Starlink to begin with. So you're like, I don't understand.
I feel like you could probably just build a new Starlink for $500 million.
You could do anything for $500 million. Like bringing internet to 60,000 people in a first world country for that amount of money seems absurd to me.
Agree. Let's jump into the third story I want to explore with you guys. This one's from the Mises Institute. Antidemocratic just means something the regime doesn't like now. And this is something I feel like, at least anecdotally speaking, I experience more and more regularly, where people like throw around the word democratic, democracy, all these words, but like what they mean is that like what I want is good thing, democracy good thing, therefore like this is democratic. And it's like, no, like, words used to kind of have specific meanings and you could actually understand what a person meant by them. But I thought this was a great little essay by Ryan McMacken here. Democracy is the new revolutionary. In the old Marxist regime, anything that displeased the ruling communist regime was said to be contrary to the revolution. For example, in the Soviet Union, national leaders spoke regularly of how the nation was in the process of a revolutionary transformation. Anything that was deemed counter-revolutionary or anti-revolutionary was assumed to be an awful thing, and that was a threat to the reliably vague notion of progress towards the fulfillment of the alleged revolution. The vagueness of the term was, of course, an advantage from the point of view of the regime. Consequently, to be a counter-revolutionary required nothing more than to be guilty of thought crime by subscribing to heterodox views in regards to the current ruling party. And again, this is something that I feel like we regularly see play out here, where people throw around the word like we need to protect our democracy, right? Like that's actually like one of Trudeau and Joe Biden's favorite little sound bites. There is like we need to protect our democracy. But oftentimes, when you look at U.S. politics, like one of the ways they want to protect your democracy is by not confirming, like by not looking more critically at elections, by not having individuals have to have their ID checked, right, in order to participate in democracy. And it's so bizarre as you start unpeeling that onion.
Yeah, well, that in particular is a funny one because they're like, oh, it's racist to demand identification for voting. And you're like, I literally don't understand how that's even an argument. Like that couldn't possibly be an argument that is valid, right? Like you can go get photo ID, you don't need a driver's license because you can't afford a car or whatever. Like, no, you can definitely go and get just photo ID from the government. I don't care where you live, that exists. And you're like, okay, so what are we talking about here? Or like protecting our democracy means mandating shooting yourself up with some new science that's moving at the speed of science with no human trials. And you're like, wow, that doesn't really feel super democratic, but okay.
So continuing on with the article, in the year 2022, we find the word democracy serving a similar role in political discourse. President Biden has delivered two major speeches this year on how democracy will supposedly be abolished if Biden opponents win. Last week, former President Barack Obama solemnly intoned that if Republicans win in Arizona, democracy as we know it may not survive. Indeed, this has become something of a mantra among left-wing politicians and their media allies. One writer at Salon chastised voters for daring to let their votes be influenced by economic concerns when democracy is under threat. One New York Times headline bemoaned the apparent reality that voters don't seem interested in saving democracy when it's all so supposedly clear that democracy is in peril. And it is just like, it's just gross how abusive these individuals are when it comes to language. And again, it's one thing when like maybe you're like random crazy aunt says these things. It's another when these institutions that claim to be beacons of free speech and be on the right side of history. You know, Washington Post has the catchphrase like "democracy dies in darkness," and yet they'll do anything and everything to obfuscate the truth if it doesn't fit within their preconceived notions and their preferred narrative.
Yeah, it's so dangerous to have somebody like Obama saying this, right? He had a lot of people that liked him. He had a lot of people that he had influence over. And he's just essentially saying, like, if our side doesn't win, then it's not democratic. You're like, well, no, that's literally how democracy works, is that we all vote on what should win, right? That's the point. If you don't win, it's because you were defeated, right? And you were defeated for reasons. Like, I really don't get those claims.
Yeah. And then further on in the article, any attempt to limit fraud, such as requiring identification for voters, is denounced as anti-democratic. Indeed, nothing better shows this than the left's complaints about the fact that some law enforcement officers have monitored polling places. As one Georgetown University bureaucrat put it, allowing law enforcement personnel to guard ballot boxes might intimidate some people and send the message that voter fraud actually occurs. This, she tells us, is abhorrent. But at the core of this complaint is simply an aversion to the idea that the presence of police might scare some people off from ballot stuffing and other forms of fraud. I think that's important, right? This idea that like we can't even like voter fraud, I would suspect to some degree has existed since voting's existed, right? Like there's always going to be people trying to play the angle. Now, again, how widespread it is, right? How impactful that individual instance of voter fraud is, that's definitely a conversation worth exploring, right? Again, I suspect that for the history of votes, there's always been cheats because I think that's just human nature. And so to not be able to talk about these things and to not be able to try and improve our accuracy and reduce the ability for bad actors to commit fraud, like, it's such weird backwards logic, right? It's like, well, we can't allow you to defend yourself because then you might defend yourself. And you're like, well, but what if I need to defend myself? And like, no, but like that'll make people think they need to defend themselves if you can defend yourself. And you just end up in like these weird circular logic loops that I really struggle to understand how individuals can, at least at moments in time, realize the absurdity of.
Yeah, and I'm still just a little bit surprised to not see the government embrace like newer forms of technology, like from the crypto world. Like we have cryptography for a reason. Like there's ways we could do this that are immutable, like we've seen with things like Bitcoin. Like there are ways to do this using the technology that we have, where it would be open, transparent, purely visible, easily audited by anybody in the system that wants to verify that their vote has been cast and check in on how many votes have been cast and for whom they were cast for. And like, I just feel like it's just, we're going to move so slow into the future from a government perspective, just because they're not going to embrace some of these technologies that could eliminate all this stuff. Like the idea that we're bringing a bag of votes and like somebody has to count these things. Like I don't think that's the best way to do it. Nor is using these ancient technologies like with their voting machines. Like we were watching last night with the 2022 US midterm stuff, like certain areas just had like 75% of their machines not working. And then so now they have to like scramble and try and get all these things hand counted, which is going to add time. It certainly adds more room for speculation that there could be funny business, right? Like it definitely doesn't make me trust you more. And it's just it leads to all these strange questions. And like when you have a bunch of people speculating that maybe things aren't fair, like I think that's where you find real conflict, real issues, real loss of trust in the institution. And I think that's honestly all the US has at this point. Like if the people can't trust that the US is being run the way it should, like I think that takes you into an interesting and potentially dark future, right?
Hmm. And building upon what the article says here, ironically, by the way, thinking to be pro democracy is not care whether or not the voting process is fraudulent. Thus, just like the term revolutionary under the old communist regimes, the terms democratic and democracy in the US today cease to have any meaning and really just mean what our side likes. And again, it's hard for me to not want to project this on to Justin Trudeau and the politics we regularly see played here in Canada. The actual details of what it means to be pro-democratic or anti-democratic don't actually matter when it comes to political discourse. The word democratic is an emotionally loaded term and essentially code for politically legitimate. All that really matters is to call one's allies democratic and to denounce the other side as undemocratic. In America today, to be labeled democratic means one has the approval of the ruling regime. Those who are labeled undemocratic are those who, like the counter revolutionaries of old, have been deemed, rightly or wrongly, threats to the status quo. And then, kind of speaking about democracy and all this, is a perfect segue into our last story here. And this one's actually a doozy, in my opinion, and really grinds my gears. I'm really glad Spencer Fernando wrote this article. An anti-democratic move, liberals trying to stop the future elected governments from repealing carbon taxes. And this is a dangerous precedent. And I don't care that they've got good intentions and they think they're saving the world by trying to implement these policies to essentially like uh, try and tether or chain future governments and future politicians and even just the future citizenry of Canada to policies that you want to see enacted today and make it impossible for people to change outside of things like the Charter of Rights, right? And things that we should hold, above politics. Outside that, this makes no sense whatsoever. And this is the worst form of governance. And this is absolutely anti-democratic. So, according to the Financial Post, last month, Jonathan Wilkinson, Minister of Natural Resources, told a crowd in downtown Toronto that the federal Liberals plan to introduce a policy to ensure carbon pricing not only remains in place through at least 2030, but also ramps up during that time from $50 per ton to $170 per ton. The idea is to raise the cost of canceling the tax to such a level that it becomes untenable. And it gets so much worse. He said that his government is actively studying carbon contracts for differences, a policy under which businesses that invest money to reduce carbon emissions will be eligible to receive compensation if carbon pricing is either eliminated or reduced. While Wilkinson declined to offer a timeline, he mentioned a policy paper that cited the United Nations climate change Exchange Conference, COP27, which I believe is going on right now, right? And we don't even know how many Canadian how many different, I forget what they call it, but like clusters, how many clusters from Canada have gone and how much that's costing the taxpayer. But that's a discussion for a whole nother time. In Egypt, which begins on November 6th. Oh, so yeah, as an ideal moment to introduce such legislation. So just to really like break this down in layman's terms, what they're saying here is we're essentially going to chain ourselves to this policy to the point that if any future government ever thinks of breaking it, that they'll just have to pay out, hundreds, if not billions of dollars to these companies that invest in green initiatives now. And so what we'll do is just make it where the Canadian taxpayer will have to pay such an absorbent fine that it'll be political suicide to ever try and go back on any of these carbon policies. And essentially understand what that's saying, in my opinion, here is them saying we know better than what any future generation could ever know. And so because we know better than anyone else alive today or potentially alive in the future, we're going to handcuff ourselves to these policies indefinitely. Like, this is absolutely stakeholder capitalism. This is tyranny, right? Like, this is authoritarianism just in a different cloak than what we're usually used to, right? So it's not a dude with a funny mustache yelling at people and demonizing one ethnic segment in their population. Instead, what this is doing is essentially chaining all future Canadian citizens to policy decisions made in this moment. It's one thing that we have crazy deficit spending, and that's terrible enough. But to actually go this far down, like, this is just so undemocratic. It infuriates me to no end. But Adam.
Yeah, I can just tell too that like behind the scenes, probably there's more to the story as well. Like, who's going to get these subsidies? What stakeholders do those companies have? What are their relationships to the people that are going to be issuing these subsidies? Like, and then what are all the hidden costs down the road to this type of a project? Like, I could just see all the waste and bloat and everything associated to this. And again, it's another example where just like the person who's actually going to end up paying for this is the average Canadian, right? Like, if your cost per ton goes up, it's like, well, now all the cost of everything related to those things in production and manufacturing and industrial things go up, right? At the gas pumps, you're just paying more as a consumer. And all of this is in some sort of like, in my mind, like insane push to just make everything electric and make everything green. And I think there's something more there that we just don't know right now. It's like all these rare earth precious metals and all of the things that it's going to take to bring Canada and all the infrastructure it would take to bring Canada to a point where it's even half reasonable to think that every Canadian should own an electric vehicle. Like, we have so much ground to cover there. And I just can't help but think that like there's a lot of incentive for the people making these rules to have these rules come into place. And probably that's tied financially or politically or in terms of geopolitical influence, like to the places that are mining these resources. So like all this shit comes from China. All of it's, generally speaking, like conflict minerals. Like, they're certainly not paying their employees fantastic wages and giving them healthy working conditions. And I can just tell you right now, like it's not going to work. Like, you can't change. And this is Trudeau's favorite thing, is saying that by 2030, there will no longer be internal combustion engines produced here. Like, we won't be selling any vehicles with that. Like, have you ever driven a fucking electric car? We live in Canada. The minute it is 0 degrees out, the battery loses 30% of its range instantly. There's almost no charging stations throughout Canada. The ones that are here, in particular, like the Tesla network, like they have issues. It goes down sometimes, right? Like, if there's too much demand on these services, they just go down. And it's not like gas where you can just sit on a bunch of reserve fuel. No, it's an active system that's a closed circuit system. You must have it up in order to get the power. Right. And it's so impractical. It's going to take so much environmental damage in order to implement these battery cars and try and switch to these green energy sources rather than focusing on like nuclear and the things that we understand well. And I know somebody's getting paid a shitload of money to make it happen. And it's really, truly not for the benefit of either the environment or the consumer. So I'm fundamentally disturbed by this idea and the fact that they can even make rules that become so prohibitive to future governments or future voters' intentions, because that's ultimately what the government's supposed to be doing, right? It's protecting the country. And I think that this is just one big ruse. And I honestly don't understand it. The only explanation in my mind that's possible is just massive corruption or incentive for the people behind these programs.
Yeah, I definitely agree with you there. And the only thing I'd add is I think there's also a certain aspect of like cultistness to it, right? So there's huge financial incentives and opportunities to bilk the taxpayers out to billions of dollars here to inflate your individual businesses that can get the best, ESG scores and stuff like that, while also believing that, if they sacrifice are present in near future, that somehow they can build this golden utopia on the other side of it. The one thing that scares me the most about this, though, is if we see them get away with this, we'll see this spill over not just in climate change policy, but into other policies, right? So, like, they'll become equity oriented policies like this and equality
Yeah.
oriented policies like this. We'll see all sorts of crazy batshit things coming out. And if Trudeau can lock us into these things, even after he's prime minister, even after his government gets voted out, like him and the NDP can just go like roughshod over every single Canadian taxpayer. And it's so fucking wrong.
Yeah, it's honestly abhorrent and just disgusting. And I really do wonder where, like, at what point did we lose, right? At what point did the actual intentions of the Canadian citizen and voter just not matter? Like, it's so
And
disturbing to me that they can just run away and do this shit with no consequences, no accountability. And like, I just feel like, and I don't know, maybe Matt, maybe we're the ones that are outside of the loop on this, but like, I don't feel like any Canadian is standing there screaming and asking for this. Like, I feel like this is just going to hurt them. And if they actually understood the full and total cost to these actions, if they would ever vote for this type of thing, like I really don't believe they would. But I also don't think there's been any transparency as to what the full cost of these things are, right? Like,
yeah,
what's the 360 on this? Like, it's not going to happen. We're never going to see it represented that way, and it's all just so political. And I really don't understand how we got here.
I think there is a small but vocal minority of individuals, right, that actually do really want and support these policies. I don't think that they've ever spent time to understand the consequences of it, but I imagine right now there's someone with their hand glued to a piece of art in an art gallery screaming for these exact policies.
Yeah,
Uh,
but like, those are extremists, right? And they're clearly, they've been so misled on the facts. Like, I don't think if we were able to interview any of those people in a 3-hour setting, that they would actually have any evidence as to why these policies make a lot of sense from an environmental perspective, a social perspective, or really anything. Like, I honestly don't think they could make the arguments that would be required of them for the type of rollout that we're talking about. Like, just deleting fossil fuels or internal combustion engines in the next decade. Like, it's simply not possible, first of all. And whatever system they do roll out is going to have so many inefficiencies to it, so many, like, the maintenance and upkeep of that thing that they try and roll out on that type of timeline is going to be it's going to be a disaster. And the total cost to the average Canadian is just completely misunderstood. There's just no way people are understanding the cost of this thing.
And as Spencer kind of highlights in his blog here, certainty, more like contempt for democracy. One of the main strengths of democracy is that it allows ideas to be put in place, tested, and removed if necessary. Aside from our rights and freedoms, which should be ironclad and protected regardless of who is in office, government should not be able to stop future governments from overturning their policies. And like, this is really important, right? Because I think a lot of people think about, well, my guy's a good guy, so whatever he wants to implement is good policy, so we should always have good policies, so he should be able to like commit us to this indefinitely. But understand that like the people that were pro-slavery, they probably thought that their policies were good policies, and if you wouldn't allow people to be able to change or evolve the policies, you would be stuck with those forever, right? And again, maybe not a perfect analogy there, but I think it's important people understand that like our perspectives evolve, technology changes. Who knows what we could invent tomorrow, right? That all of a sudden makes carbon pricing unnecessary. But if the government's on the hook for billions of dollars, they might proceed still with wrong policy simply because the financial cost that previous government or regime committed them to is simply too costly.
Yeah, I mean, how long did it take your grandpa to get on board with email, right? Or internet or cell phones or online banking? Like all of these things, like our personal preferences, our willingness to accept new technology and our willingness to grow with they just change over time, right? And we have new and exciting and effective capability and technology the further on in time that we go, because that's just kind of what we do as a species. And I think we got to be open to that type of thing. Like, I'm not saying it's not possible for us to go green. I'm saying the timeline they've given and the prohibitive cost that's going to be faced and held on the shoulders of all of the Canadian people is going to be extreme. And I don't think that that's what's being asked for by the Canadian citizens. I think that what you mentioned there is that's a small but loud minority that's making a lot of noise, and unfortunately we may end up footing the bill for that. And I don't think it makes sense personally.
Yeah, completely agree with you on that. But yeah, those are our stories for the day. Appreciate you guys watching this video. If you got value, smash the like button, hit subscribe, share on social, all that good stuff. And reminder, we'll be back to our kind of more regular schedule next week, where we'll have a second half of the show for you guys. But I still really enjoy doing these news updates, even if that's the only part of the show that we have going. I hope you guys do as well. Reminder, join the Telegram chat, as well as check us out on Substack for the longer form articles. Anything else, Adam, you want to say before we wrap up?
No, I think that's everything, Matt. And yeah, looking forward to seeing you guys back here tomorrow.
All right. Thanks, guys.
They say life is what you make it. So what happens if you actually try? What if you actually tried to get your mind right? What if you actually tried to live the high life? What if you happen to die cause life is finite? What if you actually tried to live your best day ever? What if you actually tried to get your mind right?